Hey, what's up, guys? All right, so the big fight, Errol Spence versus Terrence Crawford for the undisputed welterweight championship is about a little over 2 weeks away now. So, as promised, I'm coming to you with my keys, in my opinion, to victory for each guy. First of all, real quick side note, I just want to say, I heard Andre Ward say something, and I think it's worth mentioning here is I think we need to give credit to both of these guys for this fight actually happening. The fact that these two guys just got on the phone with each other, hashed out negotiations as businessmen without the suits, and then went back to their teams and said, hey, this is how things are going to go. I think we definitely, regardless of what happens and the outcome, we definitely need to give these guys the proper respect and credit for making this fight happen. This wasn't the suits. If it was up to the suits, guys, we wouldn't get this fight. If it was up to the promoters and the networks, etc., we wouldn't get these fights. So credit to Errol Spence and Terrence Crawford, the fighters and the men and the businessmen for making this happen. All right, so let's get to it. I'm going to start out with Terrence Crawford. So my first key here is for Crawford, I would say punch in between punches. So what I mean by that is throw punches while Spence is punching. If you notice with Errol Spence, a lot of times when he's open is when he's throwing punches. He also tends to loop a lot of his shots. His shots don't necessarily come in a straight line. So for Crawford, as Spence is throwing his shots, just get ready to counterpunch. Get ready to, let's say, even if Crawford has to start the exchange by, let's say, throwing a jab out there, jab, then Spence returns fire, jab, slip, then you come back with yours, boom, boom. Or jab, slip, boom, boom, boom. Just those in-between exchanges is where I feel Crawford, with his accuracy and, as I said in my previous video, with his long arms, could make a difference, and he can get to Spence, in those in-between exchanges. The second key for me is for Crawford, don't get careless. Don't get careless. Mind your defense. Errol Spence will take advantage if you present him those openings. It's a fight. You're going to get hit, but you want to make Errol earn every shot that he hits you with. You don't want to give him anything for free. And sometimes Crawford in previous fights does seem to have these defensive lapses at times. Personally, I think it's a little bit due to, dare I say, boredom a little bit with his opponents. So I'm anticipating we're going to see a really dialed in Terrence Crawford throughout the duration of how long this fight lasts. But mind your defense. Don't get careless. The third key for me, jab with him. Jab with Errol Spence. Errol Spence, the one thing for all his great attributes, his jab can be timed. He oftentimes gets into a rhythm and he doesn't vary the velocity of his jab. So that jab can be timed and anticipated, and you can either catch and throw with him, or depending on however Crawford fights, righty or southpaw. Let's say if he's southpaw, he can time that Spence jab, slip it to the outside, come over the top with his left, or even slip to the inside and fire at the same time with his rear hand. But Spence's jab can be timed if Spence doesn't vary the attack, which generally he doesn't. He'll throw at the same velocity. Fourth key, do not forget the body attack. I think this is one thing a lot of guys don't do against Errol Spence. You got to keep in mind, Spence cuts a lot of weight to get to the 147 limit. Go to his body. Go to his body. And Terrence Crawford has a mean body attack. So do not neglect the body attack. Also, with Spence's high guard being so good, there's shots. There are shots, whether it's a straight jab to the stomach or catching right around the elbow on each side. Those shots will be there for Crawford. So those short hooks on the inside. So don't neglect that body attack. I think this is number 4 or number 5. Use your educated feet. Dictate where the fight is fought. In my last video, I mentioned how the footwork, I actually had them even in terms of footwork. The reason why I say that is they have different types of footwork, but Errol Spence does what he does just as well as Terrence Crawford does what he does. Now, Crawford has what I would call a more active footwork, whereas Spence, he's like Tim Duncan. He's the big fundamental. He doesn't do any unnecessary movement, but he's always on balance, always stepping correctly, knows how to cut angles. His step back is fantastic. The distance between his feet, the way he moves his feet while he punches and with his punches, everything is so fundamentally sound. But if I'm Crawford, Crawford has a very educated foot game, has very strong feet. Use that movement. Spence, one of the reasons why he's so strong and punches so powerfully is because he's rooted in the ground. He's not hopping around. He's not a fighter that hops around on his toes. He's rooted. So he can dig those shots. He can dig those shots in, everything coming from the floor. Well, how do you fight a guy like that? Well, you keep turning him. You force him to have to reset. And then when you're there, right before he's about to throw, you pivot. And then he's got to reset. So that's where I feel like Crawford can take advantage of his footwork and the way he moves. Dictate where the fight is fought. And the last one for me, for Crawford, is using his cross hook combo, especially from the southpaw position. Errol Spence has a tendency when he's fighting he fights orthodox guys a lot, so for them it's the jab, but he will go behind his shield. He'll roll this way with the shot, block it, he'll block it, roll with it, and then fire back. What Crawford could do, especially from a southpaw stance, Crawford has a great cross hook combo. If Crawford throws the cross and gets Errol to get into that shield, well, now right here, you've got that hook, that right hook will be there for you. That right hook can land, and he can sneak that in. Crawford does that excellently. So now moving on to Spence. First key for me is use your jab to maintain the distance control and set up your offense. Spence does a lot of things behind his jab. And like I said earlier, with his feet, he moves in, he slowly shuffles in. He doesn't lunge in. Sometimes he has a tendency to lean a little bit, which he could get caught, but he doesn't necessarily lunge in. So using that jab to close that distance to get closer and closer to Crawford, which will then lead to my second key, force the fight on the inside. So coming up behind that jab, and then maybe he could get under a punch of Crawford's, and now he's on the inside where he likes to work and where he's great at head position, shoulder position. He's great at keeping a guy shoulder to shoulder where he could get his shots off and then roll under on the inside, get a shot off on the other side to the body. So using those two keys to get the fight on the inside and hit Crawford to the body, taking the air out of the tires, hopefully limiting Crawford's movement later on in the fight. Maintain defensive responsibility, which Spence usually does. Crawford sometimes has lapses on defense, as I said earlier. For Spence, take advantage of those if you see them. And one key for me that could be interesting is for Spence, consider not being the aggressor offensively. Consider starting out the fight almost laying off. And I think this might surprise Terrence and force him in a way to be the aggressor, maybe when he doesn't want to be. And then this can help Spence get in or counter with straight shots if he chooses to, or, as I said earlier, get in under shots. Now he's in perfect position where he likes to be, where he could get that body attack off, mix the body attack then with the head attack, but from a closer distance, negating Crawford's range and some of his advantages. And like I said, trying to get the air out of those tires. One of the fights that I noticed this was, for example, in the Mikey Garcia fight, where Spence utilized a lot of step backs at times, like where you thought he was just going to bull rush Mikey, but he came out and he actually boxed. He actually showed very good distance control. And then eventually when he was comfortable, then he was able to just walk him down and do whatever he wanted to do. So guys, those are kind of tried to make this video as quick as possible, but there's so much to unpack. There's even a lot of stuff that I'm not getting to, but for the sake of time, I don't want these videos to be too long. This is kind of the keys and the different things where I feel like each guy can have an advantage. Now I'm going to put out my last video, maybe about a week out from the fight, on my prediction and who I'm picking to win the fight.